Hello. The world suddenly changes around you, and the instruction goes out that everyone in your company needs to start remote working tomorrow. But of course, you need an action plan today. So, where do you begin? Well, this podcast is a good start as we discuss collaboration tools in episode 107 of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. Hello, welcome to the podcast where we speak to people inside the accounting and finance profession. We get perspectives and insights that are useful outside it. And whatever business you're in and wherever you work, we hope that this podcast is a great place for you to get inspiration, practical advice, and perhaps some stuff that you didn't know, which helps you whenever you happen to listen to this. We've got over 100 episodes on our archive. You may be listening to this when it's recorded, which, by the way, is late April 2020, during the period of lockdown. But if you're lucky enough to be listening in 2021 or 2022, it's become a different world, but the advice that you're about to hear will still be very useful because it is all about collaboration tools. I'm Kyle Hanlon, and I am based in the London office of the AICPA and CIMA. And my guests this week are a trio of accounting experts who sit right at the cusp of finance, technology, and people. In fact, some of you may already be familiar with some of them through their work on the AICPA and CIMA Technology Task Force. They join me in the UK from Colorado, Louisiana, and Ohio. And they are, in that order, Jim Gilbert, Les Nettleton, and Amy Vetter. Amy is an accomplished entrepreneur. She's a business executive, a TEDx speaker, and also a national speaker, a CPA, a yoga practitioner. We've just discovered she's a bass guitarist in a rock band as well. Somehow that does not surprise me. She's also a creator of the B3 method. She's based in Cincinnati. Jim Gilbert owns his own CPA firm. He's based in Denver, and he helps clients to leverage tech, intelligence, and insight. He'll tell us more about that soon. And Les Nettleton, who has been on this podcast before, as has Amy. Les is based in New Orleans, and he is Director of Information Technology Services. He manages the team of specialists that support the technological infrastructure of a regional accounting firm based in New Orleans, offices across South Louisiana. They are Bourgeois Bennett. Welcome, everyone. Les, let's start with you. I mentioned New Orleans. Where is your team normally focused on the type of work they do? What kind of clients do you help with?
Well, basically, we are a regional CPA firm. We handle a lot of mom and pop type shops. More small family businesses. I manage all the internal technology at Bourgeois Bennett, from the hardware to software to training, and now basically security. I also support our client base on technology management consulting. I think the easiest way to describe my job is if it plugs into the wall, it falls under my domain.
Okay. Jim Gilbert, how would our listeners in the accounting and finance profession perhaps already know you and your work?
I think my clients would call me the techie guy. When I advise my clients in business and accounting, I always think through the lens of technology. I'm also CITP, Certified Information Technology Professional. I'm on the CITP Credential Committee and also on the Colorado Society of CPAs Technology Committee. And I do a variety of presentations for the AICPA and a variety of business enterprises throughout the nation.
All right. Amy Vetter, plug us into your world for a minute. What would your April usually be filled with? I did already mention that this is an unusual April. Give us a sense of the sector and the client types that you engage with, and what do you typically focus on together?
Well, I am typically out at accounting and financial conferences, being a keynote speaker, and working with accounting firms on their business planning and technology, where we step back and really think about how to roadmap it, not just from the technology perspective, but the human perspective as well, and making sure that there's purpose behind everything that they do. So this is probably the first time in 15 years I've been home for this long. So it's been definitely a very different April for me.
Well, I think you've switched focus very nicely to why we are all joining together on this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, because we are talking about the things that we can use to do better stuff together. We're discussing collaboration tools. And let's talk about working together remotely. Les, why is collaboration suddenly more important than ever?
Well, that's an easy question. We're no longer located in the same physical location as each other. Our firm is an office of 75 people, and we're probably in about 73 different locations right now. In the office environment, it's easy because we get to communicate with each other constantly. It's easy to get up and walk to someone's office and discuss an issue. Worst case scenario, you can always call somebody on a phone. You have water cooler effect, where we get together and talk about things that aren't maybe as important as work, but other things that are happening. Now we have to rely on collaboration tools to replace what was back in the old days, a few months ago, face-to-face. It works, but you have to put yourself in a totally different mindset to use it.
Amy, you mentioned that this is an unusual April for you. So what are your networks and your contacts telling you? Was this something that they were ready for? I mean, do you think people in the profession, especially in this part of the world where we are, perhaps in the UK or the more technologically, what we like to think is the at the cutting edge of everything. Do you think everyone was ready to go remote at the drop of a hat?
I think it was a split bag. I mean, there were people already bought into cloud technology and remote technology and having, maybe no office. And there were other firms and corporations that had never done remote work before. So I think there is a complete mix right now of what's happening for people. The thing that, I'm definitely discussing with people is the fact that there's been a lot of knee-jerk decisions just for survival's sake in order to keep business running. And, those are the things from once we get back to whatever the new normal is going to be, to really sit back and look at what worked, what didn't work, and how do we want this to look in the future? Because I don't think business is ever going to run the same again now that everyone's had a taste of remote work.
Okay, so that's not the only thing going on at the moment, is it, Jim? Because as you and Amy and I have pretty much anyone listening, we know that at the moment, things have never been the way they are now. But it's not the only thing going on. It may seem to be all about the pandemic at the moment, but there are other things hitting companies at the same time, things like tax deadlines and filing responsibilities. And that happens even here in the UK at the end of March, end of financial year. There is so much going on. So, Jim, how easy is it to kind of focus on collaboration when there is so much on people's plates right now?
Yeah, like Amy said, there's the playing field's changed forever. All of a sudden, every company, all types of companies have to be nimble. They have to move their workforce around, figure out how to work with clients, keep contracts going, compliance efforts, SBA loans that have going on. And the center of all this has had to be collaboration. Whatever tools people are using, there's many different options and various hurdles that people are addressing right now. You've got people in the office you're trying to work with, and now people in the field. My construction clients are trying to find ways to communicate to folks in the field that are essential workers. So yeah, there's a lot of competing challenges, and we're finding that some of the collaboration tools seem to be a little bit of a bridge between all sides of a business and what they're trying to operate in.
And you did use the phrase collaboration tools, not for the first time, not for the last time during this episode. Amy, you're known for a lot of interesting stuff alongside your accounting. I think I did mention a couple of them, but where did that all start for you? And then if you bring us back up to now, when your colleagues, the people you're working with, talk about collaboration tools, these days it may be things like Yammer or MS Teams or Zoom. But back then, when you were just getting going in your career, what did collaboration tools look like? What did that mean to people?
So I've really always been someone that's pushed technology as far as I could. I've been curious, and I think it's something that we all need to think about during these times, rather than getting into feeling burdened by it all or stressed by it, but the feeling of curiosity, of the learning of what the possibilities are, can open up whole new doors. I mean, I remember, when I started my accounting services business, when there wasn't cloud and you had to pass files back and forth, and I was on one of the first file exchange networks that was like a cloud drive, which would be considered today, where you could share things with, and trying to push GoToWebinar at that time, and GoToMeeting, to be able to attract clients from all over. And that's really where I learned that there is so much opportunity beyond your 5 to 10 mile radius of where you work. And when you start opening up and utilizing technology in new ways, I was able to hire employees and contractors from all over the country. I was able to serve clients all over the world because of those tools that were not even close to as good as they are that we have today, that we're able to optimize. So it's really the mix of not just looking at technology as a functional thing. It's looking at it from a human perspective and an opportunist perspective of what could you use this for that would be different and offer something unique as far as the experience that you have with your clients or your staff that, truly could change your business going forward. So this is the time to be really curious about what's working, what's not working, and not throw it out, because there's so many learnings, and it's important to take individual time with each person that works for you or outside clients and ask them what worked, what didn't work as well, so that you can keep iterating and innovating as you move forward from this and really create something amazing from a pandemic.
So when you talk about those collaboration tools that you started with, you did mention, one of the early cloud services. When people were collaborating, what tools were they using?
So I was on Yahoo Messenger. It was a long time ago. And there was a tool, I think it was called Mango Mind. It was one of the first tools I think Right Networks ever created, was to do QuickBooks file sharing so that you didn't have to pass back and forth backups. And that really opened my eyes. I was able to serve franchises all over the country. And we were using GoToMeeting to be able to share screens and to train. So you never had, obviously I did a lot of travel, but on a daily basis serving clients, that changed everything. And so as these tools got better and better, that's only made things more efficient and opened up these markets more, where you can serve people all over the world, be on cloud accounting software rather than file sharing or hosting, that, you're truly able to create a unique solution. The problem at the time, was when you wanted to use other tools that integrate with desktop software, it would start blowing up. And now there's so many different tools that you can connect into the cloud to be able to communicate with people outside your organization or internally, but keep the work all central.
Yes, and we mustn't forget that collaboration doesn't only mean with colleagues. It means with anyone you need to be engaging and interacting with. Les Nettleton, were things the same when you started your career? Were all companies approaching collaboration the same way back then?
Well, Kyle, now I feel old. I started my career back in 1985, and PCs were just starting to make their way into the business environment. There was no networking, no internet, and no email. You either had a phone call or it was an in-person meeting. Eventually, we started to network our computers together, and then email hit the market, and that was the way for collaboration to start. When internet connectivity came along, remote collaboration became mainstream. I've seen a lot of changes in IT, but one of the things I see is basically, especially internal to the office, we've lost that art of face-to-face meeting. We tend to have all of these technologies which allow us to collaborate, but we will send somebody an email even if they're in the office next to us, instead of getting up out of our desk and walking over there and talking to the person in person. I think that's just a lost art now, especially when we're in the office. The second thing, though, about all this change is, the tools change, but sometimes we don't. When I do a lot of technology training, and let's say, for example, I'm doing an Excel training. Microsoft comes out with a brand new version of Excel where there's a lot of new features in there, but we tend to implement technologies into our systems and into our offices and then try to make the new version of the technology work exactly like it was in the old version without looking at all the new things that are out there. And I'm kind of going to be interested as we move forward with this whole thing, how this is going to work with the collaboration tools that are now hitting the market in their infancy and where they're going to change, how they're going to move forward. It's going to be a very, very interesting show a couple of years down the road, because I agree with Amy, it's going to be quite a while before we're back to whatever normal actually is.
The focus you have there on change, the tools change, attitudes and people's approaches change over time as well. Jim Gilbert, when we talk about the changes, we know that the tech and the tools are certainly not what they used to be. They've changed over time too. But what about mindset? How do you think approaches to collaboration have developed over the years? Do you think companies have always been as keen on collaboration as they are today? Or do you think way back when it just wasn't a thing that seemed important?
Well, when I started my career, we were excited about Polycom phones, conference lines and LANs, WANs, VPN connections. We could do file shares and those kind of things. And for a lot of years, it was my stable of tools were my phone, my conference room, my emails, and maybe I can get to a network drive right through a VPN connection if I wasn't at home. So that was pretty cool. So that's been a kind of mainstay. But, as the millennials have started to come into the workforce, they've challenged lots of us to think about it, not in-person kind of collaboration. What are the tools they're using? The millennials use lots of online web-enabled cloud-based tools. They don't want to spend a lot of time on phones and emails. Emails is I've literally had to teach a couple of millennials recently how to use email because they just don't like it. And so, yeah, there's been a slow adoption, and with this change that's happened with us in March and April with the pandemic, I think people are now starting to understand we do have to change. We do have to be nimble, and all those nudges by folks that want to do cloud tools that we've used or started to use, that needs to be the mainstay now. We need to adopt a technology. We need to embrace change, and we need to get beyond our comfort zone of the infamous emails and conference calls and those kind of things. There are other tools out there that can be used.
The fact that we're talking about what stuff used to be like in the 80s, for me, collaboration and tech in the 80s simply meant being able to sneak into the computer science lab at my university and find a terminal that was plugged into other terminals. So at 2 a.m, when they weren't using the mainframes, we could sit and play these massive multiplayer, Dungeons and Dragons games. And to me, that was collaboration. Could I see someone else in the same vector-generated mazes I was in. It was quite cutting edge at the time. So before we talk about getting collaboration right by using the right tech tools, not for gaming, but for whatever else is important in life, business, obviously, we need to start with the people using it and getting them into the right environment first. Now, as we've said, that can be an internal environment, external environment, and more. And this is something that Amy Vetter's blogged about a lot. In fact, I know on our AICPA pages and your own channels, Amy, I've seen your own work focusing on things like mindset and personal preparation. In fact, I was watching some of your newer B3 method videos. I think you've got B3 bites or very, very short videos you've been putting out about how to make remote work actually work. So clue us in here. What are some good ways for someone to get ready for remote work when they're not really used to all of this kind of techie stuff?
Sure. So, and those little bite-sized videos have been B3 breaks I've been putting out on social media to help people during this time making this transition. Because I think a lot of people that are not used to remote working, this is very stressful. And if you have been remote working, I think it's even been overwhelming as well, because there's just so much to do besides your normal work, but trying to get caught up and change everything at the same time and learn new technology. So it's really important that we understand that everyone is an individual. And as a leadership team, a lot of times, we're making mandates of things that need to get done or technology that needs to be implemented. But we often aren't focused on the individual and what their experience is and what they're going through. And it can be a really good practice right now if you are a manager, if you are a partner, whatever type of supervisor you are, is to reach out individually to people and ask them how they're doing, is their stress level okay, and so forth. And make sure that you're taking that into consideration in the decisions you're making in the business, as well as future decisions that you may want to make with technology as well. So it's important that we take time throughout the day to kind of reset and disconnect from the technology. Technology can start being addictive and overwhelming if we don't put the right practices in place. And as individuals, we have control to step back and take a few minutes between meetings, whatever we need to do to decompress. Because what's important is that we're completely present with the people we're with. And when we talk about FaceTime, when it has to do with remote technology, having that webcam on is really, really important in order to still create that connection, that relationship that's important in whether it's an outside client or team member. But we also, at the same time, from a leadership perspective, need to make sure that we are encouraging those types of breaks in the day, that we're setting parameters around the technology so people aren't more stressed out by it, that we tell them, what do you use Teams or Slacks for versus email versus text versus instant messaging, so that people don't feel like now they have to check 4 things, that they know what each communication tool is for and what it's used for, so they're not stressed out. It actually should create freedom for them to create more time to create the human relationships, the client relationships, and the team relationships if it's put into play. And then also as leaders, it's important that we, by example, are taking breaks and everyone's seeing that it's not all work all the time, that there's time for family time, there's time for flexibility, there's time for fun. And if you don't demonstrate it as a leader, then your staff will start feeling like they can't do it either.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Make time before you start worrying about what tech to fill it with. Yeah, that's good advice. Jim, let's switch to you. When someone comes to you and says, look, I don't have a lot of time. We are in a hole. We need to start remote working now. We need an action plan for this new collaborative reality. I need to get going now. Where would you suggest they start?
Well, I always tell, and I've done a lot of this in the last 30 days, is I advise clients to put together a representative a steering committee, an action team from the different parts of the business. And first and foremost, to look at the company culture. What is our daily and weekly processes? What are all our processes? And then start to go through a series of questions. What tools do we have now? What is available? How much IT support do we have? Who will be the process owner? Who will own the deployment? How will users be trained? I mean, that's sometimes is overlooked. What etiquette or standards do we need? And how will we overcome the nonverbal face-to-face communication that people are used to? And then how do we connect with our clients as well? So if we're going to deploy tools and collaboration tools and methods, we need to understand that as well. And then, how will we support our employees and their morale overall? So if we're going to mandate that we're going to use Slack or Microsoft Teams, how do we support them, and how does leadership follow up and say, do you understand how to use this tool? How do we use Teams? How do we use email? It's similar to what Amy was saying. What are the boundaries? What is the rule book? What are we trying to do? So if I get a message from Slack or something like that, I know what it's for and its intent. And then develop a plan so we can quickly see successes and milestones achieved, and that we can see that an implementation is successful with lots of employee follow up. Do you understand how to use this tool? And have we successfully communicated as a leadership team?
Les, in Louisiana, when you're sitting in New Orleans, do you see things moving at a different pace? Do people do things differently if they're out of the really big cities on the East and West Coast? I mean, what type of collaborative tools and platforms do you see companies using? And which ones are you suggesting, if they come to you now, which ones do you suggest they really need to be using more?
That's an interesting question, because I think that there are so many tools out there, and which ones are the right ones to use. I'm just going to be end goal oriented here and say whatever works for you is the best one out there. It's kind of like the question, what is the best word processor? Well, it's the word processor you know how to use optimally. If you know Word, then Word is the best word processor. If you know Word perfect, then that's the best word processor. If you have something that is working, stay with it. I think the whole concept here on the collaborative tools, there are so many out there, is you have to be creative. And I like what Jim was talking about in developing a group to get together and look at these things. In New Orleans, we had Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Our main office building was closed for damage for 86 days. And a few days later, we discovered that cell towers went down. So we couldn't use our cell phones, no texting. Power was out in our region for a couple months, and we hosted our own email server, which that went down due to our power loss. So we had to come up with alternative methods of communicating. Interestingly, we wound up with a remote internet accessible bulletin board where staff could post where their whereabouts were and how they were doing, because everybody had evacuated from the city. Also, the firm was able to post stuff up to this bulletin board. The thing about it was that bulletin board was put into effect when we had moved from one tax package to another tax package to be kind of a sharing environment of things that are going on in the new tax package. Never thought that that would be our method of communication for basically about 40 days while we were out of the building for 86 days, that the office would communicate through a bulletin board system. But it really worked. And I love the creativity of that. Now you have texting, group texting, email, phone conferencing, video conferencing. I think these are all mandatory to stay in communication with each other. The really nice part from the management standpoint is you can get phone conferencing and video conferencing now for free. Doesn't cost you anything.
Well, it's an interesting example you gave. You kind of set a platform up as a plan B for one thing, but suddenly you had to use it for something totally different. And you immediately found you were able to use what you had. And Amy, that's a question for you, because you did talk about making time for things. But when an organization's perhaps already been set up for remote working in theory, perhaps they had a lot of time, they did training, but they never thought they'd actually have to get and actually down and using it. Now suddenly they're having to do it for real. What are some practical steps that you would suggest a company can take to assess the tools they already have? And once they've done that, where do you think the most urgent updates to what they have often need to be made?
Well, I think it's important to be doing shadowing of your team. So a lot of times we think we know how tools are being used because that's why we originally purchased them, or we just make assumptions. But when we actually sit with people and watch them work and how they're using it, they will often explain why they're using something else because that tool isn't working exactly the way they want to. They're actually duplicating work, or things that are frustrating them about the tool. And so they're having to do some workaround and so forth. And without getting boots on the ground with the people that are actually utilizing the tools every day, and creating an environment where people have the freedom to give the real feedback, where they're not in fear that if they give that feedback, they're at risk with their career or their jobs, is really important as well. So it's important to take the steps of that. It is also important to kind of create a high level roadmap of what you'd want your automation to look like. Like, what are all the different business processes that you do today? And then go one by one. So it may be if we're talking about, using something like Zoom and communication tools, that we want to look at Zoom, we want to look at Google Hangout, we want to look at WebEx, and we just pick that piece of the business process that we're going to focus on in the next 3 to 6 months, because that's the most critical to make sure that we're doing right. Then we need to assess not just one technology, but 2 or 3. Make sure we've got a group of people testing it, giving feedback as you go along the process. And also be doing the research with people externally as well of how that tool is working, and come up with what 2 or 3 main things that are your must-haves about that technology that you're using, so that when you go back to the vendor and ask them questions, you're leading the conversation. You're not letting the vendor lead the conversation. That you're basically saying, if you don't have these 3 main things, this tool isn't going to work for us, because we've researched our business enough to know that those 3 things are the most important things that it has to have. Now, there might be other things that it doesn't have that you need, but they're not as important as the first 3. And so when you're assessing technology, you're never going to get 100%. But if the 75 or 80% gives you a better return on investment than what you're doing today, and then you just have to figure out what do you do with that other 20% to make it work, then it's still worth it to automate that process and move forward. But my biggest thing is to map it out overall, and then just, take bite-sized sections of these as you go, and make sure that you're controlling the process, that you're doing the right research, that you're bringing in that feedback as well through the process, so that you make sure that you put the right tools in place. And lastly, never think you're done. That you might put the tool in place, but then 6 months, a year from now, you're going to have to iterate, or there's new tools that have come out that might be a little bit better, create more efficiency. But as you get smarter with it, you'll continually be agile and keep modifying it to make it better.
And understanding your business and its own objectives and where it's going in the future is vital, as you say, because that's the only way you'll be able to put your finger on exactly what those deal breakers are or are not going to be. And
Absolutely.
Especially now as things are moving fast because of the pandemic, everything feels urgent. And Zoom has been in the news, but, everyone's using it, but not in ways it was originally designed for. I mean, we use Zoom. We're in meetings regularly where, we hit our 1,000-person limit. Not everyone's doing that. Skype is something that so many people were now using, but that's now MS Teams, or is it? In fact, I think everyone who thought they'd be fine with something called Office 365, now they're suddenly discovering that they're now using something called Microsoft 365. So things are changing, and, it would be quite nice if everything just technologically stayed the same, because everything else is so fluid. We just need a bit of stability somewhere, but that would never happen. So I think I'd like to ask Jim, if you talk about some of the biggest changes happening in collaboration right now, I've talked about the fact that tools are being renamed or used for different things, but what else do you think isn't making the headlines?
You talked about Skype. Teams has effectively replaced Skype, or Skype's still a viable option, but Microsoft is pushing Teams as their premier product. One of the things that people need to understand is if you pick a tool, what's the roadmap for that tool, and is it being replaced? What's the roadmap for that in the future? You have to be real careful about that and make sure you pick the tool that's sustainable, it's got a growth path, and that it's not going to be replaced by something else that in a year or two you have to replace that tool and retrain and redeploy. There's been some of my clients that have said, "Oh, I didn't realize this tool is going to expire," and that's one thing that people have to pay attention to. And pick tools that are simple, that they're mainstream. That's another thing that I advise clients to do. Look at tools that are easy to understand. Microsoft Teams is easy to understand, no matter what you think about Microsoft. And really think about things that are easy to deploy, easy to understand, easy to train. Office, the Microsoft has deployed tons and tons of training on tools. There's lots of free training out there for many of the tools. There's YouTube channels. There's lots of training. So it's not all dependent on you as the manager or your IT people. So there's that comes with these tools. You can deploy trainings incrementally with 2-minute micro learnings many times over. And so those are some of the changes that people have to be aware of.
You did use the F word. You said free. Is it something that the typical organization sits? Does the word free sit comfortably with them? Are you still finding that people are saying, well, if it's free or really cheap, it can't be much good because we're used to spending a fortune on the tech and the platforms and the tools that we use in our companies? But as you say, stuff is becoming free, cheap, universally accessible, easy. Should we be scared of free?
You should not be afraid of free. It may be free for a period of time. There may be, a lot of the cloud mobile providers are providing introductory free tools. Then you can maybe upgrade to something with a little bit of cost to it. But you should not be afraid of it because the major players like Microsoft, you got to understand what their roadmap is. They're moving into artificial intelligence, and their company is doing really well because lots of people are using Microsoft Teams. If it's free for now, that's an entry point into many other technologies because they want you to come into their suite of technologies. If you look at Office 365, there's lots and lots of tools that they want to put the hooks into you. They want you to understand all the different tools like Microsoft Forms and Workflow and lots of things that are out there. If you're already paying for Office 365 and you get a new app, don't be afraid of it. Embrace it, look at it, analyze it, and maybe it's an addition to the skill set of your team overall. That
makes good sense to me. I mean, I know that you've got even companies like Google using their G Suite platform, and things are always changing. Free may be how you start. It doesn't mean that's how you'll end up, because you can always scale. You can find services and upgrades to pay for that will still be worthwhile. As you talk about the roadmap, as you grow, as your needs change, they would still be able to help you. Les, you know all about change. You mentioned your own experience of the disruption caused by hurricanes and floods over the years in your part of the world. What tools are you seeing organizations using now? What are the ones they're jumping on the fastest?
The jumping on fastest is the interesting part, because this is what we're like in week 5 of this whole thing now. And all these tools have started to really come up to the front. I think right away, everybody seemed to embrace Zoom. And then it was as soon as the FBI came out and said that Zoom had a security issue or security flaw, and a couple of times a Zoom meeting was hacked into, it was like a scene from the Monty Python movie where everybody was yelling, "Run away, run away." And it was really interesting to watch everybody start to go into panic mode over Zoom. Well, Zoom addressed that and said, we're going to spend the next 90 days doing nothing but adding security features. And they have. They've added mandatory passwords into meetings. They've done a pretty good job so far. But I think due to that, some people moved away from Zoom. I've seen my clients go to meeting, Ring Central meetings, and Microsoft Teams. I'm also seeing group text messaging services like GroupMe starting to take hold for smaller teams, for project management type teams. We're inside of our firm, while we're holding departmental meetings via Zoom, we're also using GroupMe when we have smaller groups that just need to get together. And it's not necessary that you want to be in a real-time environment. You just basically can go ahead and do text messaging, and they're setting up group text messaging. Since New Orleans is in a hurricane-prone area, we have to consider an evacuation as each hurricane season starts, and that happens on June 1st. And this is predicted to be a very high hurricane season this year. So it's kind of thrown us into we would be at this time after April 15th tax deadline, we would be starting to plan our hurricane preparations. What do we need to put into effect there? How are we going to connect with each other if everybody splits out and runs to every part of the world? Now's the time to be doing the research on these collaborative tools, as they do tend to change constantly, and especially when it comes down to security. I think you got to be looking at these things week by week. Look at the white papers, make sure that these things are doing what you want it to do. And then also, no matter what tool you're using, be careful what you're saying across that tool. Like, for example, I wouldn't want to take a email and attach somebody's a PDF of somebody's tax return on that email without password protecting that tax return in the PDF format. Therefore, if I'm doing that because I don't want that social security number to get out into the domain. So I think the big thing there is when we look at these tools that we're using right now, make sure you keep up with the tools that you're currently using, and make sure that there aren't any security issues that are coming up, coming down the pike that would cause you concern if you have to be HIPAA compliant or you are worried about some sort of security for sensitive documents.
Thanks, Les. We'll continue our conversation shortly as we discuss some practical steps to choose and use collaboration tools much more effectively as individuals, as teams, and as companies. And we'll ask what we each can do to make ourselves better collaborators. We'll also find out a little more about the AICPA and CIMA Technology Task Force that is on the way. This is the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more about this podcast and about the rest of what we do at gobeyonddisruption.com. Right, let's go back to basics. It's not all about the latest tech, is it? We have to remember the stuff that we've always been able to use, the tools we sometimes forget, but which are still so important. For example, how can we use the telephone differently? What about calendars? How do we share routines and schedules across multiple teams in multiple time zones in a much more effective way? And perhaps I'll ask this one for Les Nettleton. I also just have to let listeners know that Amy Vetter has had to step away briefly during the recording, but she should be back a bit later. Les, what is the importance of routine? Let's talk about how we set ourselves up for the day. How's that important for ourselves as well as for our teams?
Well, I think now that we're working in a different environment than we used to, maintaining a routine is one of the top priorities that we've got to put into our lives. When you're going to work, everybody wakes up basically the exact same time every day. You drive the same route going to work. You have your same cup of coffee. Everything is routine. Now you come back to, I'm doing this at home, and the kind of, what you feel like doing is, okay, well, I can maybe sleep in a few more minutes, or I can shower later on, or I don't have to get dressed up. And there are things which are disrupting what your normal routine is. So what I told our people is basically maintain the routine. You set something and stick to it. Get up at the same time you did for going to the office. Set up a schedule the night before. I like to write out using task lists what I'm going to accomplish the next day. Eat properly. I think that's one of the things we're missing right now, because we were all at the office. Now we're at home. And are you snacking all day long? I think the routine basically puts us into an environment that humans like routine. We just thrive on that. I think the other side, you had asked a question about the telephone. How are we using the telephone differently? Just to throw out one tip, I have a couple of clients that didn't realize that their office phones had a forwarding function on it, and that they could forward their office phones to their cell phone, which is with them all the time. And so they've started to do that now in order to make sure that they're collecting their office calls real time, rather than letting it go to a voicemail system and then having to go pick up the voicemail and then get back with the client.
When you talk about other ways that we can work with those tools that we have, we know that routines are really important, but I did mention the telephone. That's pretty important too. I know that when we were talking earlier, Amy Vetter doesn't make much use of the telephone at all. But what about the calendar? Jim Gilbert, how do we share routines and calendars in better ways in this age of collaboration?
Absolutely. On reference the calendar, what we've been doing with some of my clients, I've been sharing some of my recurring meetings and sharing some of my calendars to clients, so they can, and to my internal team members, so they can start to see if I'm busy or not, what's on my schedule, those kind of things. And I've been trying to work with folks on actually putting things in the calendar that were once in-person meetings or telephone conferences, to really try to understand what's in front of us, make order of our day, and have kind of a plan of attack. And there are many different tools out there that we've that go with your calendar to try to help bring people together. There's many online tools for that as well. And lastly is just keep your own calendar organized, so you can be a service to your teammates, your employees, and your clients. Not just have an open calendar with nothing on it. And I think that's critical as well.
And I like what you said about keeping it up to date. Always have a plan of attack. So let's do that. Let's imagine a listener right now who needs that plan of attack, an action plan. Let's say they have a team of fewer than 100 people. Let's say they've mostly got company laptops. Perhaps some of them have their own machines. Perhaps they couldn't get back into the office in time, so they have to deal with the computer they've got at home. Perhaps some of them are already working remotely, and all seems to be holding together so far, a couple of weeks into lockdown. But let's speak to Les and Jim. What would you suggest that companies in this situation need to do right now? They need to perhaps look at better security, or try to remove outdated software, perhaps set up virtual lunches every Friday. Let's start with Les. What is one collaborative tool that you think companies that have started working remotely, things seem to be hanging together okay? What should they consider adding, upgrading, or losing? And what's one other thing they need to be checking or doing to help their people collaborate better?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've done is we have an externally hosted Exchange server, and so our calendars can be shared amongst everybody. The nice thing about that is that we have set up group calendars where we're doing, for example, if we have a teleconference line and there's a teleconference coming up and you want to reserve the teleconference line, you go on, fire up Outlook, go into your calendars and reserve the teleconference line. I think that was a thing we hadn't been using a lot internal to the office. We had our own personal calendars, but now making those calendars shareable so so we can see what's going on with each other. I think the other important part, though, is to be able to manage your people that way. One way of managing your people when they're remote is by looking at their time reports. What are you doing? What are you accomplishing? How much are we getting done? The other side, though, is now you can add in the calendar. I can see where someone is, as long as, again, like Jim said, as long as they're keeping their calendar up to date, which is so important. But you can go ahead and see where these people are at any point in time, or maybe what they're working on or what they should be working on. Now, personally, I don't think there's a technology that exists to take the place of face-to-face collaboration. I think the main issue I'm seeing with all this is not the technology specifically, but I think the lack of amount of times that people are meeting. I have a client that meets via conference call every morning at 9 a.m. Now, some meetings, there's not much to talk about, and it goes for about 5 minutes, but others can be longer. And this is something that our firm does during a hurricane environment. If we are in an active hurricane situation, we have a 9 a.m. standard and a 9 p.m. standard conference call that the three main people in the office, we will get together and talk about what has happened during the day, what we're expecting this upcoming day. But we're not scared of getting together and meeting. You got to do the meeting. I think by doing this, we've established an open line of communication. Our staff doesn't sit there during the day wondering when will the next time they'll have contact with another staffer. They know that tomorrow morning we're going to be getting together again. And at our firm, our departments now are starting to hold weekly meetings where each department gets together via Zoom with their departments. And while they're going over who's doing what from a standpoint of work environment, the underlying factor is how are you doing? We're checking up on the people, making sure that the people are okay and that everybody's handling it well. And if we see something or we suspect something, then we'll go approach that person specifically. This is something we did after Hurricane Katrina. The suicide rate went up 5 times the normal rate in the year after Katrina. So our firm set up a hotline where we could anonymously call in if we were having problems. I see that's probably something that's going to happen again, allowing the staff to get things off their chest, that they're not holding things in, because now we don't have that people-to-people type environment. You're with the same person or same people every single day, which sometimes can become extremely overbearing.
And the difference between asking people, what are you doing, and how are you doing? Big difference, but both important questions. Jim Gilbert, for smaller companies who need an action plan, as we said, under 100 people, most of them working remotely at the moment. What do you think is one thing that they need to be doing right now? Perhaps one thing they need to be checking or doing to help their teams collaborate better right now?
Keeping it simple for everybody, for leadership, employees, interacting with clients and everybody. So start with a simple plan. If you're going to roll out Microsoft Teams or whatever the tool is you're going to use, start out very simple. Make sure you gain success and buy-in. Buy-in is critical from employees and lots of other folks. You can't force technology on people, but you have to get buy-in. Make sure people understand it, they're trained, and that they understand the use of the tool. Am I using my phone? Am I emailing? Am I using Teams? And then, I think part of what you can do as well is, it depends on the duration of this remote working session. Get used to that. Research the tools a little bit more, the enhancements and all the various things you can do it, and get good at the tool very well so people can understand how comprehensive, like, for example, Microsoft Teams. That is has a wide set of tools and capabilities, super good to do, and leverage that for the future, whether we're working in the office or working from home in the future. This can be a great tool to really inspire and motivate employees going forward, and then use the tool for what it's there for. Use the tools to have virtual fun hours, check on the NFL draft and celebrate successes, and check on folks and communicate between one-on-one people, groups of people. Continue the company culture. Use the tool to inspire and motivate and to support the company culture that you've that all of us have adopted in person for the most part. So good advice for most folks.
Very sensible. But before we wrap up for this show, I think it's time to get a quick understanding of that AICPA Technology Task Force I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Les Nettleton, you're a recent addition to that group. I know you're all part of it. After all, why else would you be here? Tell us about how you contribute.
The task force is comprised of experts in the area of IT security, cyber risk and advisory, privacy, and business continuity. We meet on a weekly basis to determine how the technology needs of firms and organizations are evolving along with the COVID-19 crisis. I hope that some of my experience with catastrophic disaster planning due to Hurricane Katrina and my 30-plus years of technology consulting adds to the group's mission.
Thanks, Les. Jim Gilbert, what's it all about?
Thank you, Kyle. The Technology Task Force, also known as the AICPA Technologies Task Force, is designed to help members with relevant information as quickly as possible as we work through the coronavirus and the COVID-19 stay-at-home orders and various other things. We're trying to help CPAs and business to help their organizations as well, and individuals try to understand best practices and technologies and various other things to help them be successful during this period of time. We're trying to move as quickly as possible and get information out with all the various members on our team.
Now, before we wrap up, let's do some signposting. Amy's been able to join us again, so we'll get to her in a second. One resource that you would recommend and a place that people go to find out more about you. Jim Gilbert, what do you recommend people look at online to find out more about this topic and about you?
Absolutely. My web address is jimgilbertcpa.com, and you can find me there, all the information about me. But I would recommend subscribing. That many CPA firms, there's lots of new web online content that are similar but different. Many of the CPA firms, the AICPA has a great technology section in there. I would advise you to look at that. And there's lots of micro learnings and comprehensive look at how do we work remotely with collaboration tools, and just spend the time to look at this. So this is a chance to pivot on technology and embrace this going forward. And don't be afraid of learning and growing and experimenting and getting competing different answers on things, those kind of things. It's great for the mind and good for our profession.
And Les Nettleton, where would people find out more about you and the topic? And what is a message you'd like to leave for our listeners who are in this situation where they're needing to move quickly, think fast, and act now?
Well, my email address is lesen@bb-cpa.com. And I can be reached there. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook. If I'm looking at things to go to get more information, obviously the AICPA is a wonderful resource. We have podcasts like this. We have webinars going on. I just participated in a webinar a couple of days ago that we did it on working remotely, and we had 1,800 people on the webinar. These are really, really good times, and a lot of them don't have any cost to them. Journal of Accountancy is another great place to go. And also I like the CPA Practice Advisor. I think if I had to give one thing, a message to leave people with would be basically build a think tank of your most creative people and have them meet regularly. Meet, and meet some more. Whatever method you decide to use, whatever collaboration tool you use to meet is great. Just be sure you're getting together. Don't leave people isolated. The work from home environment builds isolation. We're not used to that in our work environment, but we need to accept that fact. But the isolation can be broken by maintaining contact using some sort of collaborative tool.
Thanks very much, Les. Amy, for anyone who'd like to find out more about collaboration tools or follow your work at the B3 method, what are some resources you'd recommend, and where can people find you online?
Sure. So you can find me on social media anywhere, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, at Amy Vetter CPA. And I also have a YouTube channel where I put out those B3 breaks that are also on my social channel. I have a website, amyvetter.com, and that also has a drop down for the B3 Method Institute, which stands for Business Balance and Bliss. And that has online learning to help you with these tools of just self-reflection to help you create an intention as you move through change and also getting to know yourself better through this process too. My biggest takeaway would be is just have compassion for yourself. None of us are perfect. There is no perfection in this. And it's all about learning and being curious and just being good to ourselves as we go through this and not being too hard on yourself when things aren't perfect. Just let it go and keep learning from it and create something even better.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much, Amy, Jim, and Les. We'll have to leave it there, but as we've said, our show notes will have links to all the resources you've talked about. And of course, a quick note to our listeners, you can view those show notes really easily. Just click on the episode's info icon in your podcast app on your smartphone or your tablet, or you can open the episode in your computer's web browser and you'll find everything right there. Thanks again to our guests, and of course, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, go tell someone about it. And of course, tell us what you think. We really would love to know what you'd like to hear more of, and perhaps you'd like to hear us do differently. Email us via the feedback link you'll see in the show notes. From the AICPA and CIMA office in the UK, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, keep healthy and keep listening. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.